God bless. This is NFL Moneyball, brought to you by NFL Extended Strategic Principles, found on the web at NFL-ESP.com. I am your host, Mark Anthony DeBello. You can find more information on me and this program by going to my personal website, markanthonydebello.com, and clicking on the Sports tab. Again, this is NFL ESP. Today is Thursday, October the 29th, and NFL ESP, or NFL Moneyball, is our premier podcast or program. It's a half-hour program to cover NFL Week 8. I typically break it up into 3 segments. First, we cover games from the perspective of NFL ESP, or Extended Strategic Principles. Secondly, for those who have an interest in the games in Nevada, although I do believe in the integrity of the game, and I don't believe people should be necessarily using the B and G word when it comes to games, but it doesn't mean that the information, especially the use of an exclusive number we call the power spread, is not valuable and accurate. And I do believe, which is the fundamental basis for NFL ESP, is that number can be used to help coaches make more productive, prophetic, or predictive basic strategy decisions when it comes to improving their team's play and surely scoring, and then ultimately their win-loss total. But again, I do believe in the integrity of the game. And then lastly, our coverage of fantasy football and how the use of the system and, again, the exclusive use of a number called the power spread applies to that. Again, my goal is to either advance this system or the use of it for NFL teams and get picked up by a team. Although I'm halfway through the season, I did actually reach out to a team this week. I'll mention that momentarily. Or also enhance my voice in the media, because there's nothing more frustrating to me than to listen to these media members who really just cover games from one point of view and perspective, and usually inaccurately. But the way they see the games, I mean, you only have to listen, and you hear things like, well, they need to score more, or they need to play better defense or play better offense. You know what? A monkey could tell you that. Okay? That's not real analysis, okay? Or at least the analysis. I mean, I can appreciate some of the people's perspectives, knowing they've played the games and they're former pros, and I can't say that, so I give them all due respect for that. But when it comes to analyzing a game, not most of them, 99 out of 100, don't give you really any insightful analysis. They basically just tell you what happened, or what they think is going to happen, and usually what they think is going to happen is wrong. But again, when you hear me describe a game, and I'll do that a little bit more here in the first phase of the program, from an ESP perspective, you're going to get some real insights on what teams need to do to be productive, to score more, defend more, and to win more games. And it's a very unique, I think, insightful angle. And again, I'm just simply trying to, improve the listenership, which is the reason, knowing that not many of you are listening this year as compared to the couple years previously. I'm not being overly professional. I apologize. In the broadcast or the recording of this, whether it's my tone, my enunciation, my pronunciation, I just want to try to knock it out and get as much data out to you as I can, or thoughts, or things to that effect. I know I can be more professional. I have a degree in communications from the University of Miami, the Canes, where I played in college, one of the finer communication schools in the country. I have an extensive resume, both as a producer and as a performer. But again, I'm just trying to get this information out to you, and appreciate those who do listen. And just, if you know anybody who wants some, unique insights and valuable data and information from a unique perspective, quote unquote, spread the word. So, having said that, again, you're listening to NFL Moneyball. We're going to cover the games from last week, the season, the standings, and what we can project this week, and then in the weeks to come. Again, with 3 mindsets: the prophetic, the productive, and the predictive. And again, covering games from the NFL ESP perspective, which is spiritual, motivational, X's and O's, and lastly, the strategic with our exclusive use of a number called the power spread. So having said that, let's look at last week. I'll just let you know I reached out to the Ravens again this week, as I did at the beginning of the season, knowing I had a history and a long affiliation with Coach Mark Trestman, who's the offensive coordinator, especially after watching the Ravens succumb to the home field advantage that I've said repeatedly is 4 to 7 points for the home team, and based on timely, biased officiating calls, in addition to other things, whether it's gross penalty yardage is part of it. But we surely always know there's things such as the travel, the playing surface, different, comfortability factors like that. Certain things with regards to players and their adrenaline of being at home, being more stoked, if you will, from, playing, hearing more applause, which raises a person's adrenaline, which is, really key to a player's by chemistry and biology. So anyway, having said that, the Ravens got a couple really bad calls against them. That can be combated, that can be lessened, negated when you're on the road. But what you really also need to do is to make sure you're getting the just home field advantage when you're at home. As again I said, up to 4 to 7 points, and you can easily see how the Cardinals got that last week in a couple really obvious, bad calls. But that's, again, from our perspective, it's to be expected. But again, you need to combat it, and then you need to make sure you take advantage of it when you're at home. So anyway, again, having said that, we're just into the third quarter of the Thursday night game here. Again, I said it's Thursday, October the 29th. So let's go over last week, the games a little bit from the scoreboard, a little bit of look at the season and the standings from an NFL ESP perspective. And again, if it, applies to people who are listening who have an interest in Nevada, I know it can profit you there, because the people who, there's a handful of people who came up with the formula, who know the formula that I use. There's basically 10 of them, and 9 of them all work for Las Vegas. I'm the only one who does not, who doesn't want to, who never really did, and really just tried to come up and have developed and mastered this unique system, which takes, and again, there's 4 components to it, main components, but with regards to the use of the power spread, how do you use it when it applies to head coaches making basic strategy decisions that help their team, make the more probable and productive decision. But it's also done, again, through the innovation of a third coordinator in the booth called the GMC, or Game Management Coordinator. And I know some teams have already done that. And again, I had this idea 12, 13 years ago, and one of the first people who ever implemented it, who I met and spoke to at length, was Hall of Fame executive Mr. Bill Polian. They called him somebody else. He was a famed college coach who was actually in the booth for the Colts and was doing this. Last year, the Bears erroneously decided to go with somebody else to do the job that I had set up. That person didn't do a very good job, didn't have the data that we had, or that I had, and I say we, meaning God and I. And the coach, as much as I worked with him for 10 years, to set myself up for that opportunity, went with somebody else, and the Bears had the season that they had. They surely could have had at least 2 or 3 more wins if you just calculate what 10 or 15% of 16 games, or even if you get into the playoffs is. It increases a team's win production by a minimum of 10 to 15%. So anyway, having said that, I can only try again this season as I did at the beginning of the year with a couple of 2 or 3 teams, the Jets, the Vikings, and the aforementioned Ravens. And again, after seeing the Ravens' record and what happened last week, knowing I could have at least got them to, instead of being 1-6, this information and system, and yes, if a quarterback can mean 9 points to a team on the field, why can't a certain analyst or a general manager or a coach? I mean, they make, one player can make that big of a difference through the course of a season. But again, I'm not saying something dramatic like 9 points a game, like a starting quarterback is is valued at, or 0 to 9, but let's say the best ones are 9 points. But I mean, you can't put a price, if you will, or a value on a great owner or a new ownership to a team, and then just down the line from the president to the GM to certainly the head coach. They make dramatic differences in the play and the production from teams. And then like I said, the main position, let's say, being the quarterback. So having said that, I can only do what I can do. And the other aspect, again, is the broadcast of NFL Moneyball, which covers the games from the unique perspective that you don't hear, you've never heard, which gives true insights and not, again, the frustrating and to me, just sometimes idiotic analysis of certain media people who just tell you the score and tell you that teams need to score more to win, or the offense needs to score more and the defense needs to stop the other team. I mean, that's not really a real analysis. I mean, or they just read the stats to you. But anyway, so having said that, let me recap, because we're at the third of the way through here, recap last week and go to this week in the season. Last week, Seattle, San Francisco. San Francisco was about a 4 or 5, I think, power spread underdog at home. I don't know that they got a lot of home calls. It's a new stadium. I don't want to get into all of home field advantage, but I know they didn't do much to overcome, basic strategy-wise, to overcome what was, the probability of about, 7 points is 25%. So maybe only about a 30% chance they had to win the game. I don't have the probabilities chart in front of me, but that was predictable that Seattle, could win that game. I thought Buffalo would actually defeat Jacksonville. Not surprised that the game was close. Not surprised that Jacksonville won, but it was basically turnovers because of a second-string quarterback there in Buffalo. I don't have all the data in front of me, but I know that they lost basically because of turnovers, or they would have won that game. And surprisingly, I must admit, Buffalo's not having the season I thought they would have. I don't know that as Rex Ryan. I think it's the quarterback, actually. It usually is always the case, especially if there's an injury. So, but that game was a close game, and as we projected, it would be close. Also, don't think that teams should be playing in London. If there are teams in London and the NFL wants to expand in that direction, I don't know why you wouldn't send anybody but the New York teams out there, the Jets or Giants. I mean, that's how the U.S. basically got started. People coming over from Europe, to the Big Apple or Ellis Island in New York City, and so it seems to me they'd have a better fan base, and it just seems to make more global sense to have a New York team go over there. At least one of the New York teams represent the city teams, not Buffalo. Every week that they're in London. I have some other thoughts, but I'm not going to share them without being compensated. But that can really help grow the league and help the league produce as a whole 10 to 15%. Also reminds me of the television market. One of the great values of NFL ESP is that we can project and prognosticate what are going to be the best games, with the most fan interest, the closest games, the more exciting games, the games that have more meaning as the season progresses, especially or even from week 1 with regards to records. What's worse than seeing 1 in 14 teams play the last week of the season, and the game ends up being a blowout. But again, that's to be avoided. That can be avoided, and that's one of the dynamic things NFL ESP can actually do. So let's get back to last week. I thought Detroit would actually beat Minnesota. Not surprisingly, Minnesota's kept Detroit under 20 points. One of the great barometers that we use at NFL ESP to determine the strength of a team is the 20-point mark for their defense, whether they can, and how many times they hold the team under 20 points. Minnesota held Detroit to just 19. Again, as prognosticated here, I think Minnesota's a wild card team, mostly because of their defense. If Bridgewater plays well, which apparently he did this game, they definitely will win. But you can't go wrong with a running game with Adrian Peterson leading it. And again, I think Minnesota has a really good defense. I know Detroit is really underperforming and playing. I can't quite assess why. I admit I was wrong about them so far this season. I thought they'd be the playoff team, but it looks like it's going to be Minnesota, and I'm not going to change on that. After week 2, I saw all I needed to see in Detroit. But again, if you heard me last week, I'll tell you that, Detroit is definitely a higher power-ranked team than what the record is, and I think you might see that this week. New Orleans defeated Indianapolis. I have to admit I didn't see this one coming. But again, this is a very balanced year with regards to, there's only a couple, 2 or 3 teams that are really good, and the rest are all mediocre and can all, win any given Sunday, as the saying says. So, excuse me. But I will say that last year New Orleans had a couple of, one of the charts we have is what the turnovers, which every coach can tell you the importance of turnovers, that New Orleans had, I think, at least 3 or 4 games last year that they would have won had they not had as many turnovers that they did, and oftentimes that will balance out, especially fumbles, but quarterback play, is the other aspect of that, or safeties as well. But last year New Orleans was losing games that they shouldn't have actually lost. Pittsburgh played Kansas City. We liked Kansas City. They won. Miami against Houston. That was a 50-50 game. Miami ended up winning, which could be projected. They said that a lot of times when you have a high like getting a new coach or that kind of adrenaline rush or that change, whether it's philosophy or whatnot, that oftentimes carries over to 2 weeks but then dies out the third week. So you saw that Miami had 2 big high-scoring weeks, played above their head even though they didn't play very good teams. Either week, Houston is really a bad team. And then this week, as I said, I'm watching during the New England game, and they're not scoring a lot of points, and New England is beating them, a little bit handily here. New England played the Jets. We called this game spot on, right about a touchdown. The Jets had been playing a light schedule, finally played a really quality team in New England. Cleveland against St. Louis, we projected that spot on, with St. Louis winning. Atlanta, as I mentioned, is an overrated team. They played the 2 weakest divisions, their own and the NFC East. They came up against Tennessee. If Tennessee had Mariota in there, Tennessee would have won that game. I can guarantee it. Not that Mettenberger lost in the game, but that game was much closer than what the advertised power spread was. And Tennessee very well could have won that game. Tampa Bay and Washington, famous Jameis Winston is really a gunslinger. I had mentioned this. He's either going to throw a lot of interceptions or he's going to throw a lot of touchdowns. Cousins is definitely an improvement to RG3. And in a game that was 50-50, it really came down to being a 50-50 game with a 1-point Washington win. Oakland played San Diego. Not surprisingly, that was an upset. We call that. That would be, that type of upset. San Diego, the problem San Diego is having, one of the worst things you can ever do as a team is just kick field goals. We have a really defined set of rules on field goals. I mentioned this a few years ago, that one of the, basic rules of kicking field goals, from an analytical perspective, is that you really only want to kick them when they're 50 yards or more, to be honest with you. Or surely on fourth and something more than 5 yards. So you began to see that in the last 5 years. There's been more field goals over 50 yards than ever, and that's because coaches are wisely attempting them more. At least, from that perspective, surely guys, they strengthen their legs, better kicking techniques, all these kinds of things matter, indoor stadiums, the wind, of course, but for the most part, you really only want to kick field goals if you have to, meaning again on 4th down and let's say more than 4th and 5, although there are cases where you should be going for it on 4th and 6, 7, or 8, or even more, and then definitely, or more so over 50 yards. What you don't want to do is settle for field goals, basically in the red zone, within your 10-yard line, and so many coaches are not aggressive enough, especially when they're the power spread underdog, and San Diego is one of those teams. They've been getting a lot of yards, and you hear they know this, that they're not scoring well for the yards that they're getting, and yards per point or points per yard is a huge factor in the way we look at a game. So anyway, not surprisingly they lost there. Dallas and the Giants, again, I don't know if I commented on this game last week, I know how sloppy the Giants-Eagles game was. This was not much better. Dallas, if they had anybody but Castle, if they had Tony Romo, would have won that game. Again, sloppy, weak division, poor teams, the Dallas and the Giants in a weak division. Carolina and Philadelphia, As expected, Carolina won this game. Again, Carolina's playing a bit above its head, and Philadelphia, as you've heard me say repeatedly, is really an overrated team and should have slowed that game down and done many, many different things besides tempo. Arizona and Baltimore, I've already mentioned that. Actually, the game was right around the power spread number, not surprisingly. But again, Arizona really won because they got 7 points of home field advantage. It's that simple, or that game would have been, spot on that number. So let's look at, we're at about the 20-minute mark, two-thirds of the way through the program. So let me go over the standings real quick and then look over the games coming up this week. As I mentioned, there's only really a few good quality teams that I've seen this year. If we look at the AFC East, it's the Patriots. The Jets will mellow down. I'm surprised that the Bills aren't doing better. The Dolphins will mellow down, meaning, the record would be around 50-50 or a little bit less. So the Patriots are really the superior team in the AFC. The Broncos, I think, are overrated. Their offense, their defense is keeping them in games. Oakland, KC, and San Diego, they're all relatively equal. We projected that at the beginning of the year. Cincinnati's doing better than I thought, and they're actually a pretty good team. One of the indicators I look at is the amount of injuries on the team. And on the injured list, Cincinnati doesn't have a lot of injuries, which means they're a better team. They're stronger, they're faster, they're tougher. All these things. They've just been more talented. Injuries are not by accident. The number one cause of injuries is you're not as good as the other guy. He's better than you. He's beating up on you. And then there's certainly other factors you've heard me mention repeatedly. But Cincinnati is actually a pretty good team that I regrettably underrated. Pittsburgh, we've spoken about them. Cleveland with Manziel, I've spoken about them. They're just a 2-5 team. They should be doing much better than that. The Ravens, really tough schedule. But again, when you're not the best spiritual team, and the Ravens made a huge error this season, I can't tell you exactly what it was. I prognosticated at the beginning of the year they actually should be doing much better than they are. And losing, we know everybody knows close games, but there's, believe me, more to it than that. But they're much better than their record. But that's only going to get you so far. The Colts, I think, are going to be a lot better off than they're performing now, and there's nobody in that division that can compete with them, especially if Marcus Mariota stays injured and Tennessee doesn't do more to improve their defense. But again, I'm surprised Tennessee's not doing a little bit better than 1-5. But again, the Colts will be even though they have a bad record, they'll be a good team. And they're near the end. In the NFC, there's nobody in the NFC East that's a good team. In the NFC West, the Cardinals are a good team. Again, I've got it down to the Cardinals and the Packers, had it that way at the beginning of the year. The Rams are improving. Gurley is doing great for the Rams, and what I mentioned at the beginning of the year, if you go to the sports blog or click on the NFL-ESP.com website, what I mentioned about them, they should have taken Melvin Gordon. What I meant by that was that they should have taken a running back. I didn't know how fast Gurley could get back, but they needed to improve their running game. Gurley had a knee injury. I didn't know he was going to get in the lineup so quickly, but the fact that they did, and he is in there, and he is doing well, is not surprising that it's helping the Rams produce in the record. It is surprising to me that it got in the lineup so soon, but I can't know all that information like, Jeff Fisher and the Rams, know. So, that was my point about them needing a running back, and they got one there. Seattle, San Fran, Seattle will improve. It'll be between them and the Rams, I think, for the other wild card. Minnesota, I mentioned already, is going to be a wild card because of their defense. The Packers are actually a good team, and Carolina is actually a good team. Atlanta will trend down. They're not playing anybody, and they're overrated. They can keep their record, but they still probably, I don't even think, may make a wild card. I just don't think they will. I'm not going to change my opinion from the beginning of the year. Did say they'd improve, but I just don't think they're going to be a wild card team, and that division's going to catch up to them. New Orleans, once those turnovers balance out, and if Jameis, is a rifleman that he is, and actually can, spot some touchdowns instead of throwing interceptions, Tampa can improve. So anyway, the real teams to contend with in the NFC are Arizona and Green Bay. I put Carolina at the third in that conference, and then in the AFC, I'm looking at New England, Cincy, and Indy, and I'll put Denver sort of in the third level. So those are your teams to the end of the season. So let's look at this week. I'll knock this out pretty quickly and try to do so again from an NFL ESP perspective because we only got about 5 minutes left. And I'm sorry if I don't get to a lot of time covering fantasy this week. already mentioned New England is playing Miami now, so I'll go past that. I think the Detroit-Kansas City game is a toss-up. I liked Detroit last week. I'm going to have to try to take them again, but that's a toss-up game in London. Minnesota's better than Chicago, but when you've got a home team who knows that they're the underdog by the media, that means a lot to a team. Call it bulletin board material, whatever, motivation. But Minnesota's the better team than Chicago, and I don't know if Chicago's going to get the home calls that they actually need to get. But that's, they've got that listed as a toss-up game. But I know Minnesota's the better team. Atlanta, Tampa, that's a closer game than the power spread is indicating. Atlanta is not 7 points better than Tampa. Again, they do get home calls in Atlanta. Tampa's got some injuries at the wide receiver position, which will hurt Winston. Again, he's a gunslinger. He should run more to make up for that wide receiver not being in that game. But again, you don't know whether you're going to have 4 touchdowns or 4 interceptions from him. But I think Tampa could actually win that game. The Giants against New Orleans, there's no way the Giants are a better team than New Orleans. It's a shame because the Giants, people are overrating them. The media is horrendously overrating them. And you'd rather try to take advantage of a team like New Orleans in that game. It's just, like I said, it's a shame that the Giants aren't playing a better team this week. You could really know that the Giants were going to lose. St. Louis is playing San Francisco. St. Louis at home is a decided power spread favorite. I don't know that they get the home calls they should be getting at home. San Francisco is not as bad as everybody thinks, but they are playing bad. And I don't think all the problem is Colin Kaepernick. Again, what Colin Kaepernick should do, and I can't lay out the whole plan to you, but he's got a strong arm and he's got great legs. So he should be dropping back like Russell Wilson does, 20 yards to throw the ball, and throw it long and throw it far and stop trying to pinpoint passes or run. It's that simple. You don't throw he throws too many balls away to the sideline when the receiver's not open. I don't care if you rush for -1 yard or +1 yard. In the long run, you're going to gain more yards by as soon as you see guys are covered, hightail it and run. Okay? Do not throw the ball to the sideline or out of bounds or, an incompletion. Now, I understand it's better to have an incompletion than a sack, but in the long run, in the long term, no pun intended, Colin Kaepernick is going to produce more yards for his team by running the ball than to, throwing the ball out of bounds if it's, for an incompletion. So he needs to either run or throw long passes. Arizona, Cleveland. Cleveland's, again, I think it's to their benefit. I hate to see any player hurt, but if Johnny Manziel gets in there, he can make things happen. I don't know what went on with him with this, his drinking. I pray to God he's still clean and sober. It's the only way he's ever going to succeed as a pro, period. You cannot succeed drinking alcohol, period. Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, Roethlisberger is back. I don't know that makes much of a difference, although I do like Pittsburgh at home, but that should be a close game. Cincinnati, they're 2 decent teams. Pittsburgh always plays Cincinnati close. Everybody knows that. San Diego and Baltimore. San Diego, what I was getting to the point before is that you can only gain so many yards, and it catches up to you that you've been only kicking field goals, which means, let's say they gain 500 yards one game, 500 yards another game. That's 1,000 in 2 games. They're not going to get 500 in a third game. They're probably going to get less than their average. Okay, let's say if the average is 333 yards a game, they're only going to get 100 yards, okay, basically. And you can't really score a lot of points only, getting 100 yards on offense. I know that's not really pragmatic or realistic. I'm just giving you, a point. But so that's what's happened. Happened to San Diego last week in Oakland, and I think you're probably going to see it with Baltimore this week, as this is a must-win for Baltimore's season. But that's still a toss-up game. But San Diego again needs to stop kicking field goals. Period. Houston, Tennessee, it all depends on Mariota. If he's in, I think Tennessee wins. If he's not, Houston can win that game. But those are, 2 poor teams unless they just do more with Marcus Mariota. He's the entire franchise. They need to make sure he's playing like that, and they strategize like that. The Jets are playing Oakland. A lot of people like the Jets. It's a close game. If everybody likes the Jets, you probably want to like Oakland. The Jets are a better team. And I can't get into all the details here because we're short on time. There's no way I see Dallas beating Seattle. If the Giants can disrupt Castle, what do you think Seattle's going to do to him? With Romo, different story. which is why I've always liked Tony Romo, and he's always been underrated, and he's always a high-point producer. You can just look at with him being out of the lineup, what he's doing to Dallas, and Dallas wasn't that good a team with him in the lineup, but he's that dramatic a QB. Denver, Green Bay is the better team than Denver. Denver at home is motivational. They do get a lot of home calls at Denver. Pouty Payton, no disrespect to him, but, he works the refs, and the refs work a lot for Denver. But Green Bay is actually the better team, in which would be a low-scoring, close game. I think Indianapolis is going to outplay Carolina. Carolina, they're basically even teams, but you're getting a lot of power spread points with Indianapolis because they've been losing, and Carolina is giving a lot more because they've been winning. So I think, and I'm hoping Indianapolis plays much better, and it could actually surprise there against Carolina, although it's no surprise to me. So anyway, having said that, sorry I didn't get a lot to fantasy this week. Again, they've outlawed it, if you will, in Nevada. I'll get to more of that next week. But I did give you some really insightful data, I think, last week with regards to fantasy. And now that I'm competing, I don't want to reveal too much. So you can try to find me on DraftKings or FanDuel. Since the NFL seems to endorse that, I can, more openly use my information to benefit, not the way the insiders have been doing and actually, quote-unquote, cheating. Well, cheating. They've been cheating the other players, but that's to be expected when you have something new, and people should have known that when they got involved in it. But anyway, all that aside, God bless everybody. Thank you for listening. This has been NFL Moneyball. I'm your host, Mark Anthony DeBello. God bless.